Okay, I can see a few people still joining, but we'll get started and people can catch up as they join. So thank you once again for joining today. We're really excited to have a lot of interest from people all over the world. Today, we're going to help you think through the problem or the challenge that many of us are thinking about, which is as vacation rental bookings are returning, which we're feeling in different parts of the world, how can you manage your business and what sort of decisions can you take to stay afront of the competition? So firstly, I'd like to warmly welcome my co-panelists today. Firstly, Flo Stitch, who is the Data Partnerships Director at AirDNA. Welcome, Flo.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I'm the Director of Partnerships here at AirDNA. If you haven't worked with us or don't know who we are, AirDNA is the leading data and market insights company that provides short-term rental data to really anyone who's interested in this market, may it be an owner or a mid or large-sized agency up to the largest players in this industry.
Thanks. And also joining is Thibault Masson, industry analyst and actually the founder of Rental Scale Up. Welcome, Thibault.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for having me. And hello, everyone, wherever you are in the world, join us now. So, yeah, I founded Rental Scale Up. It's a vacation rental news and analysis websites. So we basically publish articles about the industry, talk about trends, talk about how to optimize your presence on the big OTAs. And we have a free newsletter. So I'm very happy to be here. And as you can tell, I'm right now in a vacation rental, of course, is somewhere in the mountains. That's hence the background.
Lucky you, I'm in the office. All right, and just to introduce myself, I'm Andrew Martin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Your.Rentals. We're a software provider. We work with small and medium-sized property management companies and even hosts directly to help you manage your business in a more effective way and to grow. So with that, let's talk about what we are going to cover today. Firstly, we're going to do a very quick recap on what we saw in 2020. You guys know what happened in 2020, so we don't want to spell it out again. We want to start looking forwards. We're going to then talk about what we think summer 21 will look like. So we're already into the season in terms of starting to get some data that will show us what summer 21 will turn out like. And then we hope for the second half of this to really talk further about strategies to make the most of the returning demand. And because we do have people from all around the world, I'd just like to point out some of the data we're going to share today is European focused. It's very hard to cover everything in a single session. So if it's not your focus, please try and follow it because it is quite interesting. Europe's a bit further behind some markets. So you might feel a bit happy that you're seeing things differently than what we are here. But certainly in the second half, the strategies we're going to talk through, I think apply for everybody, where we are dealing with uncertain demand throughout the rest of this year. So without further ado, let's jump into what we saw in 2020. There were several key trends that we've tried to pick out, and we think these are interesting in terms of thinking about how this year is going to play out. So one of the key trends was that non-urban outperformed urban, and this was a bit of a reversal of previous years where we saw a really stellar growth in urban rentals. The second key trend was that domestic travel really dominated. And when we look at some of the data, you'll see that's not just a myth, that really did happen. Third point is that the industry really had to adapt and start to offer a lot more flexibility in order to keep demand at the levels that it could be at. And that we think is something really important to consider for this year as well. And finally, just to wrap it all up, well, it was a super low demand in the spring last year, all around the world. Summer 2020 shone brightly in some places, not everywhere. And then we had the second wave, which really impacted the autumn and winter season. So let's keep these factors in mind as we go through what might happen this year. Flo, could you just tell us a bit more about what we actually did see in Europe? How did it look by the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, we initially, we'll see this in a slide later. We had kind of the first signs in January and February where it looked like 2020 is going to be a record year for short-term rentals with its ongoing success that kind of had super 2018, super 2019. And then, as we all know, kind of COVID kicked in and brought travel to a grinding halt. And what we see here is kind of the EU on average saw a decrease in bookings of 42%. And having said that, there was still kind of Central European countries like Germany or France, Switzerland, and Austria that didn't suffer just as much. Whereas Mediterranean countries like Portugal, well, not that Mediterranean, where Spain and Italy and Greece, Croatia, for example, we see this year with 50 to 64% really saw a massive decline in bookings. And as you just mentioned, even though these are kind of the overall numbers, there are property managers out there who had a record year, mainly in rural regions in Central Europe, in Denmark, in Northern Europe, where the typical tourists that might travel down to the south to get some sun stayed at home, stayed in their local countries. But since no one was interested in going to urban markets, it was the rural markets that could really soak up this additional demand from travelers.
Yeah, they speak in Denmark of it being a year to remember, and exactly as you say, Danes usually go to Spain, Italy, Croatia, Greece, but forced to stay at home, or at least encouraged to stay at home. The Danish summer houses were almost fully booked out for the summer.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, kind of from an AirDNA point of view, to see that Denmark is a very particular market here in Europe, where there's a lot of direct bookings, a lot of niche sites that provide the Danish market. The market isn't as present on VRBO and Airbnb. And if you just look at Vrbo and Airbnb numbers, you see the same kind of decrease in bookings. Whereas if you talk to the local players with 100 to 500 properties under management, they all had, like you said, a record year.
Fantastic. Okay, but let's start to look forwards, because that's in many cases a year to forget. So the key question on our lips is really, will summer 2021 see the same patterns as we saw in 2020, or will there be some things that are different? We've developed a few key themes to talk through today, and I think central to a lot of the discussion is this concept of uncertainty. And uncertainty, we're talking about from the guest side, even though there's a lot of uncertainty elsewhere in the market. But when we see that the uncertainty is reduced, we can actually see demand responds extremely quickly. So in order to understand what this year might look like, we need to understand how can we impact the uncertainty. And to start with, we're going to quickly look at the UK market with some recent data. The UK obviously is different to mainland Europe in a couple of ways. One is it's no longer in the EU, but secondly, the vaccination programs there are a lot further ahead than most European countries. So what you can see here is since the start of the year, the new booking demand by British guests, the week the booking was created. And you can see here in this point, the Prime Minister announced a plan for reopening. And you can see the very dramatic increase in demand. It was almost 500% growth in new bookings overnight. And then there was a little bit of negative press trying to cool down the expectations a few weeks later, which had the impact of making demand fall down. So one of the factors is this uncertainty of the guest. And Thibault, maybe you could comment a little bit on this aspect. I mean, what do you see is different this year in terms of the certainty people feel compared to last year?
Sure, Andrew. I think the UK example is very interesting in the sense that you're right, it's the vaccinations, but also the fact that the UK had been under very strict lockdown, unlike actually some of the mainland European countries at the time. So here you really have a moment where the British Prime Minister went to speak and spoke about a new timeline, right? And basically said for England and Wales that things would be all reopening certain dates, like vacation rentals basically could start welcoming people on April 12th. So people were starting booking for like spring and summer, right? So here it's very interesting to me is that it really means that here you have like people have sort of gotten used to, okay, there's a lockdown. After the lockdown, there will be, a period where things can start again. So unlike last year we were like during our first lockdown, like, well, let's go through this and then things get to normal, right? And so people were probably started booking really early for spring and summer once the lockdown have eased. But here people are, as you can tell here, this is a clear timetable. People start booking very clearly. But in other countries or states in the US, right, things are not as the same clear cut. It's not as clear cut. What I mean is that in a lot of states in the US or countries in mainland Europe, the deadlines, the timelines are not as clear. So it does mean that and like last year where people kind of knew, okay, we'll just wait for the first lockdown and we'll be okay. People are like, okay, we're waiting for the lockdown to ease, but actually things sometimes look in reverse, like things are getting stricter in some countries right now. And right now we thought they would not. So it's very tricky, because I think it does mean actually compared with last year, we're actually more lost. We should have gotten used to lockdowns and to things, but here you're like, not sure what to expect. So what's very interesting, again, it really means basically for Europe in spring, it's kind of tricky, because even cancellations in April, for example, is getting a lot of cancellations, people who are started booking for April. So I think that's the main difference in behaviors and expectations. We've gotten used to it, but also we've gotten used to say, oh, you know what, we should really be waiting. That's why surges may be even stronger this year than last year, because there'll be a moment when,
Yeah. It's really interesting points. And continuing on looking into the British market flow, could you tell us your reading of this chart here and why it gives you some optimism?
Yeah. So we see here, so first of all, to help you understand and read this chart, the black line in the middle is kind of a normalized 100 towards 2019 data. So we're looking at demand for 2020 and the beginning of 21 compared to a normalized 2019 to get kind of a relation of what the last normal year in our industry was. And what I mentioned earlier, we see in February and January and February kind of this spike where it kind of suggested that we would have kind of another record year, and then the grinding halt and the crash that led up to June 20, where summer kicked in and people got relaxed a little bit. We were able to travel. Limitations were kind of, or restrictions were lifted. We see then towards the end of 2020 and the beginning of 21 how the curve kind of goes down again, where we saw, I don't know if it was now the third or fourth wave already. But now since the beginning of March 21, where we have these very positive news from the UK, who are doing a tremendous job in regards to vaccinations, and we see kind of confidence returning to the market and this uptick. And the fact that we see kind of almost the curve going close to 90%, give this another 1, 2, 3 weeks, and I'm absolutely confident that this line will break the 2019 levels, and we'll see actually more positive booking signs than we saw in 2019.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely some cause for optimism. Let's put it that way. One of the other topics we want to cover or discuss a little bit is that uncertainty is not just about the guest, whether they can travel, but it's also the destination markets as well. So if you think it through logically, the first part is, can I travel? Do I want to travel? But secondly, where am I traveling to? And am I going to be able to travel there? And secondly, once I'm there, is everything going to be open or is everything going to be shut? So is it worth going? And back to the UK example, Flo, you had some really interesting data here. Would you like to talk us through?
Yeah. And I mean, before I start talking about the data here, I think it's kind of easy to see how we self-behaved last year. Andrew, we talked about this kind of as family fathers, and people here in the audience listening will kind of have similar experiences where if we're humans, we want to travel, we want to go out, we want to see the world, but when uncertainty like last year hits, you kind of choose a destination that's either familiar to yourself or that's within reach. We talked a lot about drive to destinations. No one really fancied urban centers. We try to avoid large crowds, and we see here in the slide how massively London was hit with an almost 90% decrease in regards to bookings. And Scotland has been hit quite heavily as well. I know there were also kind of some discussions with local organizations, with the government, because the government wasn't really supportive of short-term rentals. And then the further down we go in the chart, we see Northeast England, we see Southwest England, so we see the Yorkshire Dales, we see Cornwall, very rural regions, very easy to drive to from London. A lot of supply in regards to nice cottages where you can be with your family on your own, and you can kind of travel responsibly. And the slide, we could have the same slide for Germany, for France, for Spain, for Italy, and for many locations in the US, where you have the urban centers kind of being vacant, and the 1 and 2 hour drive to destinations soaking up this uptick in travel demand.
And if we expand the viewpoint a little bit, this is looking at other parts of Europe. What do you take from this?
Exactly. So same spike that we saw in the UK, January and February in 2020, with really positive signs. Same crash where we see the UK crashing the heaviest, and then recovering, where Spain and Italy are still suffering. And we see that the Mediterranean, as we saw it earlier, really is hit hardest from this travel downturn. And the very positive sign here is France, that actually returned to 2019 levels as one of the first countries. Even though we see now a slight downtick towards March. And again, I'm absolutely confident that all these colors will kind of go back up and break through the 100 barrier, which would mean that they outpace the booking behavior of 2019.
And we're seeing that in the US at the moment, you mentioned before.
Exactly. We just actually posted the same information about the US. And I can say this with great envy, but also with great joy, that the US is really doing such an amazing job. I'm not sure if it was Churchill who said that the Americans will do eventually the right thing after they exhausted every other option. And I think 2020 and 21 was a good example of that. So they're doing a fantastic recovery job, and traveling has resumed to almost normality in many regions.
Okay, and this here is at a country level, but sorry, if we're looking at some of the actual specific locations people are choosing to travel, what can you tell about this?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a bit hard to see because it's such a big map of the whole continent, but it's really easy to pick out where the hotspots are, where it used to be. So the size of the circle gives you the size of the market. So we see our London, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, your Rome, where travelers from all over the world love to go to. And the color, if we see it red, is just the lack of travelers appearing. And then we see in the Mediterranean coasts, in the mountains, where we have with yellow towards green, almost a 0%, so no change in year over year. So this is just January data for now. So we see that, again, people are avoiding the urban centers, but people are still traveling. and the more rural and the more kind of isolated it becomes, the more normal the season of property managers will be at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the important question is, there's still a lot of uncertainty. There's some big changes in where people are going, but can we recover for the summer? And I think this one starts to give us a little bit more optimism as well.
Yeah. So we see here again the occupancy, where we are still early in the year, but the fact that we are now kind of crossing with the blue line, which represents 2021, we're crossing through the green line, which is 2020, shows that we're already kind of outpacing last year, which shouldn't be that much of a surprise. And now we're kind of in a similar direction as it was 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So occupancy, just occupancy, is kind of sort of on the right track. And considering that we still have a lot of restrictions, that confidence in long travels, kind of plane data, air data is still kind of fairly low. Shows that we are kind of on the right track for recovery.
Okay, and finally, just to round out this section, once again, people are booking the out-of-city stays a lot more frequently than they were in the past in relative numbers compared to the cities.
Exactly. The light blue line shows us the small rural destinations that are notably below above the green markets, which are the major markets, like our mentioned Londons and Barcelonas and Madrids and Romes of this world. And it's really you could see how it plays out between small, mid-sized, large, and major markets. It's really in that order where we as humans are avoiding people, and we're trying to go as rural as possible.
Okay. And if we look at Europe as a whole, this I think also unfortunately breaks everything up into winners and losers, but where do we see the most positive signs and where we're struggling?
Yeah. The thing that I found interesting is, again, we talked about earlier Denmark and the countries that had seen kind of success last year. I'd be very surprised if Denmark has just as a successful year this year. We see on the left that France had a spike in the summer because the French didn't go south, the French didn't go to Germany, the French didn't go to any other country. Germany had a similar curve. The United Kingdom, the same thing, what we talked about earlier. The deep Central and Northern European wallets that enjoy kind of the southern regions stayed at home and spent their money in front of their door. And then on the right-hand side, we see Italy with the dark blue color that had some recovery in July, but then with a kind of third wave hitting, crashed back down. But all the curves, even on the right-hand side for the countries that see not as many weak bookings, all the curves apart from the Czech Republic are going upwards.
Okay, and finally, I thought this kind of sums it all up actually. So what we're seeing is that the stays during this period, when we are still under lockdown in many countries, is at quite low levels, but we're actually starting to see new bookings pick up, and we do feel the summer rush starting to come. And certainly at Your.Rentals, we see that what normally would happen in January has been pushed to March. So there is a bit of a delay, but it's definitely has been picking up the last 2 months.
Exactly. That's kind of also the feedback that we're getting from our clients, where here, for example, property managers I talk to in Spain say typically January, February, they're super busy. They're not. And it's just kind of a shift. And you shouldn't be nervous if you're not receiving reservations just yet. We see kind of that that revenue is kind of is fairly stable, that the destinations that do see demand should be fairly confident that they can book their rates, their places at similar rates that they did in 2018 and 19. And the fact that we are now breaking through the 2019 levels in regards to new bookings just shows what I mentioned earlier. People are eager to travel. They want to travel. I think we've all seen the parks around where we live and the mountains and lakes. We've discovered them by great length, and it's time to see something a little bit more or something new and a bit further away from home.
Absolutely. Okay, so we'll shift our focus a little bit now. We know that people want to travel, but what's kind of holding back people from booking and traveling, and how can we, that will lead us into what we can actually do to try and strategize our way against this uncertain demand. One of the things that we see really clearly is reducing uncertainty for guests. There are different types of uncertainty. We looked at, can I travel, if I travel to a certain place, am I welcome? Is everything open? But certainly the hip pocket, the wallet impact is something that we've looked into very closely. So more flexible payment and cancellation policies reduce uncertainty for guests. There is still uncertainty for travel in the summer. So what we actually see at Your.Rentals, some up-to-date data, is that if we look at the type of cancellation policy that's offered to the guest, be it partially refundable, which is our old term normal cancellation policy, versus a fully refundable policy, meaning that you can receive a full refund if you cancel 7, 14, 30 days before check-in. And what we're seeing right now is that it's grown to a level that 80% of all new bookings created this month for fully refundable policies. So it's growing, and it also presents a challenge to property managers, right, Thibault?
Yeah, Andrew, if I may chime in here, I mean, if you look at, if I link back like something Flo has shown in this graph, if you're a property manager, we're thinking, oh wow, okay, this right now I'm not getting the bookings I should be getting, right? It's like it's yet a second year with very low cash flow right now when it comes to March, April bookings, because these bookings just materialize. And second, not only is my cash flow low, but at least in the bookings I'm getting now for the summer, which is good news. We just seen that they're coming in. But now I'm the one taking the whole risk on my shoulders, right? I have to make it super flexible for people to cancel. So what if they do cancel? Now, again, my cash flow position won't be improving. So it can feel very tricky, but hopefully during presentation, we'll be talking about how to address that.
Yeah, we'll certainly come back to that issue because it is super important, and we'll discuss that a bit more in the next section. Okay, moving right along. One of the other things we saw last year was that domestic travel grew greatly. Is it here to stay, or is it just a fad? I agree with what Flo said, that people have done a lot of domestic travel, or at least some in the last year, and they're itching to go further afield. What can we see from the data at this point? Well, if we look back to 2019, so our last normal year, domestic travel, so travel within the same country, was around 20 to 30% of bookings. What we saw last year was a big shift, so that it actually moved the complete opposite. We saw 60 to 70% of travel was done domestically. And what we can see right now for 21 is the first 4 months, these are all completed check-ins. So you can see that the domestic travel is still around 70 to 80% of all travel. But if we look at bookings that are confirmed, not yet checked in, for the rest of the year, we see this desire to go further afield. A lot of people making bookings for cross-border trips, which means that as soon as the uncertainty of restrictions and some other policies that are being put in place for safer travel between cross-border come into place, it's going to explode. And that's really, I think, a positive we can all look forward to. Thibault, you said something really interesting. You had a catchphrase, I think you trademarked yesterday, right? What was that?
Oh, the same places, same faces, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Tell us about the concept, because I really like it.
Oh, sure. I mean, as we've all experienced, is that I think this year there's like people want maybe to travel, but maybe to a place that's familiar to them. right? Maybe the places they've been to or been in the past, or they're comfortable with, or they can drive to. That's something we saw last year. It's probably going to be happening this year as well. It's very strong in the data that, big OTAs like Booking.com or Airbnb have shared, right? People really want that. And the other thing, they want to see familiar faces, meaning that if they're willing to travel, maybe in a new destination, it would be to reconnect with friends and family, people you have not seen for 6 months, 1 year. If you're an expat, it's really something you're willing to do. So it's very interesting is that, of course, families will travel together, maybe to familiar places, but even single people will may be willing to travel if only to see their own family. So same faces, same places would be strong. And we'll talk about that in a few slides, but it's actually, we may not have a choice anyway. So let's see about that later.
That's right. Okay, but that kind of rounds out the let's say the different dynamics that we're seeing and looking into for how is 21 going to play out. Now we're going to shift for the last part of the webinar today to have a bit more open discussion about how you can strategize and your tactics as a property manager to make sure that as demand is ebbing and flowing, that you're making the most of it and beating your competition, as we titled the webinar. So the first tip is that things can change really fast, and to be ready. Demand surges can happen really quickly. So the first message is that you need to be ready for that to happen, because it can literally happen overnight. We'll talk in a lot more detail about the things you need to be ready for in a minute. But first, we're going to look into how do you know when to expect a demand surge might happen. So to dig into that a little deeper, we have the concept of feeder markets. This is, where do your guests come from? Are they largely domestic, coming from nearby, or are they coming from other countries? Most property managers should have a pretty good overview of how that's looked over the years. And if we look at the next slide, we can see that it changed massively last year. So we just take a few examples here from some of the larger European markets to explain the chart here, and you'll be able to have a copy of the presentation after the call here today. But if we look at Italy, so in 2019, Italians traveling in Italy made up 26% of bookings, and in 2020 that turned to 63%. So you saw this massive growth in domestic travel within Italy. And the second one there is the USA. So guests from the USA in 19 were accounting for nearly a quarter of the stays in Italy, and that dropped down to 2% last year. So that's a huge chunk of the market that just didn't come last summer. And if you look to the other countries as well, you'll see very similar trends, a big growth in domestic, apart from Greece. It's a bit of a special market in that sense. But those guests from the USA, and in some cases from the UK, just did not turn up. So one of the things you should be thinking about is, where do I think my guests are going to be coming from this year? And you may already have some clear insights into that. What do you think about this, Thibault, in terms of feeder markets as a property manager? How do you think through this challenge?
I think when we look at the data, first, it's sort of easier for a country like France, or people who have properties in France, to sort of get bookings, right? When you have a strong domestic market, it's easier to get people to stay and travel around. Obviously, Portugal, Greece, Croatia, for example, have a huge supply of beautiful vacation rentals, apartments in Lisbon, for example. Mm-hmm. There's no way the domestic market can support this level of supply, right? It's too big. And if I think if you look at Greece as well, what's very interesting is that Greece was actually able to welcome UK guests because they had like special corridors, like agreements, let's say, between two countries like the UK and Greece, so people could travel. So it does mean that it's kind of complicated, and we'll talk into that, but you even have to follow, especially if you don't have a big domestic market. So first, focus on the domestic market, one. But second, if you don't have domestic market, you may have to even look at what's going on, what is agreement between governments, what's going on, because that's clearly what helps in Greece in this case. It's obviously a domestic market has to be number one. And I will take another example for North America. For example, I'm also doing consulting for clients. I have a client in Mexico. And what we're doing with this client is that basically on some platforms like booking.com, for example, you are able to give different rates to people using the website like booking.com, depending on where they're from. What I mean is that, for example, this client in Mexico has lowered their price for Mexicans booking in Mexico, whereas Americans booking will see a higher price. So it's really a moment where as well you can tweak maybe cancellation policies or prices even in some cases to really adapt to what you want. You want, again, in Mexico, it makes sense to have lower prices for domestic market and higher prices for Americans just because of purchase power, for example. But you have to think about that.
And also, I think, think about your destination as a whole. Like, how do people get there? You mentioned Portugal before. A huge amount of supply, not the most amazingly big domestic market, and it's actually a fly to destination for many people. So, do we see the return of flying to holiday, or are we going to see more drive to holidays again this summer? Okay, so that's a bit of a challenge for everybody. Understand how your feeder markets have changed, and then that's going to cause you to think about, how do I reach the people from the feeder markets that I think are going to be big this year, be it domestic or perhaps a change in the mix of people coming from abroad as well. I don't know that we're going to see a lot of the US. Some of these trends that you see here are probably likely to continue. Okay, the next point here is to try to identify what would trigger a change in demand for your market. So what should you be looking out for? And I think Thibault highlighted a couple of these things before. What do you see here, Thibault, if you're a property manager? What sort of triggers are you looking for to predict a demand surge?
Yeah. So the first example, we talk about domestic market being very important, right? So if you have a big domestic market, and just like the UK, for example, your prime minister, your prime minister is going to be talking in 3 days from now and could be announcing something, you can sort of expect a surge. We'll be talking about this later. So is somebody in your government going to make a big announcement? That's very important to look at. But the other thing is, we talk about Greece, for example, or Spain, or the islands in Spain, for example, is a big feeder market like Germany. What are they doing? For example, we have the case where here, at some point, Germany said, oh, we're going to reopen travel to Spain, for example. And then they reverse track and say, nope, maybe not. Give you another example. Yes. So what's very tricky now, I mean, when we wanted to, so the call we have today, I think we started talk about this a month ago. And I must say by now, I thought things would be very clear and easy for everyone, right? But France, for example, yesterday banned incoming flights from Brazil. They didn't do that before. That's new. This morning, I woke up, and in Netherlands, where I live, some of the time in the year, they actually announced that Dutch people will be able to travel, but when they come back this summer, they'll have to do a 10-day quarantine. Well, if I have to do a 10-day quarantine, I think twice about even driving to France, right? If I'm Dutch. So what I'm saying here is like, whenever and there was a press conference by the government of the Netherlands yesterday. So if your government's going to talk, think about this. But again, if your feeder market, for example, is the Netherlands or is Germany, it's tricky, but you have also to follow what they're doing, because that's it's going to trigger a wave of cancellations or a wave of booking. So you really have to be on top of that. And last thing, I think you mentioned, maybe Andrew, you know more about this than me, is that I talk about corridors between the UK and Greece, but even within Europe, for example, we're trying to have like digital passports, COVID passports to have things through. And I think, Andrew, right now there's a prototype that's out there. It should be put into place. Do you have more details on it?
I mean, I've been a little skeptical whether it's ready before summer, but there's certainly been in the last weeks a lot of commitments, and actually, the European Commission and Parliament have moved this forward. So the current status is it will be ready in June, so that we can have frictionless travel between countries within the EU during the summer. wouldn't bet my house on it, but certainly it's the right direction. Flo.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something because since I've just been on a trip, on 2 trips actually, where I think as a like putting myself in the shoes again of the guest, of the traveler, communication is key with the property manager. There's with all this uncertainty, I mean, we have many questions anyway. How do we check in? Where is it? Is it easy to find? What if I'm coming late? Will the automatic door entry work? All this anxiety that we have anyways when we travel, and that's multiplied now in this scenario. And I had kind of 2 different experiences where we first had booked a place that was still last year, and there was a pool, and it wasn't exactly clear if that's a private pool to the property or if there's other parties potentially using the same pool. And we contacted the owner, and the feedback was basically, yeah, we ourselves, the property manager, might use the pool. And we said, well, we're traveling with elder people. That's why we wanted to clarify how much kind of privacy and distancing we have. And they said that their kids themselves will not use the pool, but they might. And I thought, come on, if you're a property manager and you're a little bit thinking through what your guest is going through in their head, and you're asking these type of questions, just give them some leeway and maybe restrict yourself. And then the other, on a positive note, we had just booked kind of for a long weekend house here, drive to destination, a little bit in the mountains, get away with an open fireplace, really nice. And we had booked it a while ago, and the Spanish local government was talking about closing down the comarcas, which is like the provinces basically, which would have meant that we couldn't leave the Barcelona area, and we would have had to cancel our trip. And we reached out to the property manager and said, well, if we actually come in a day early, we're kind of outmaneuvering the restrictions because we're leaving the province the day before the restrictions kick in, and you can always come back. And they were smart and flexible and said, hey, the place is not being used. Just come the night before. We're not going to charge you. And basically, they saved their booking this way. Otherwise, I would have had to cancel.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of the feedback, just ongoing conversation. Put yourself in your guest's shoes. Understand that they're extra anxious. I understand that it must be very annoying to deal with all these questions over and over. But you're really saving their vacation and putting people's minds at ease.
Absolutely. Okay. So to summarize, I mean, know your feeder markets, understand what might trigger demand surges in those markets.
And if I just, Andrew, on this one, just staying on this one, it's thinking about this, like, so another group, we talk about familiar faces, same faces. One group of people, I'm talking about Europe here, but one group of people who will want to go all through this quarantine and understanding the rules will be the expats, right? If they've been away for a year from home, this summer they will want to come over. So if you're a property manager, you should probably be posting in Facebook groups targeting expats, like your home. Like if you're Greek expat groups on Facebook, you should be out there, to try to help, explain to them the rules, have them, and they'll think of you to book their place, right? It's very important. It's not something we don't usually talk about, but again, some people will want to go through the hoops to get home or get to their where they grew up, for example, but you need to, why don't become the voice that help them find the ways how to get there? Just as Flo explained, okay, if you come one day earlier and the rest, or here, for example, I'm actually under lockdown in France, but I managed to come because my property owner was understanding, and we found a way. So expats again could be a very interesting source of market beyond your domestic marketers. That's a good tip, I think, for property managers.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on because we do want to try and take a few questions at the end. So the next point really is about how to deal with this uncertainty in demand, because we don't exactly know what governments will announce when. So until demand looks strong, stay flexible, but be ready to adjust. So Thibault, I'd really love it if you could talk us through some of these points about how you're thinking through, how do I stay flexible, but I don't want to be too flexible, and come back to some of the issues about pricing and cancellation policy.
Yeah, so it's sure, Andrew, it's a tricky one. So let's imagine at your property you can only have one cancellation policy at the same time for the whole year, right? For example, you're on a channel manager, or you are on a channel like Airbnb that only allows you to pick one cancellation policy for your property from now to the future, right? Maybe your interest, as we talk about, how things are changing all the time. Maybe your interest is actually to still have a fully refundable cancellation policy until, for example, your government makes the timelines very clear, right? So if you have so it means like if you can pick only one policy, maybe holding on to that one policy until things are a bit more clear for your domestic market, especially if it's a big market, it could be important, right? Mm-hmm. It may, if you have different channels that offer, for example, the possibility to have different cancellation policies at the same time. Think about booking.com, for example, where you could say, let's be a bit more flexible. I don't know, until for let's May and June. I don't know. Hopefully things will be clear, but say for May, June, I will make flexible. But you know what? If in my markets, I know I'm in a strong market where things are going to sell out, because I looked last year and it's going to sell out, I can also I can at the same time say for bookings for July and August, I'll be a bit more strict, like only partially refundable, not fully refundable, for example. So again, think about what your market is like. Think about what your tools can do. It's very important. And as well, understand the rules on different platforms, right? Depending on how you deal with things, if you deal with cancellation policies in your channel manager or straight on the different platforms like Vrbo, Airbnb, or Booking.com, you may want really to understand what's going on. As I said, Booking.com can have different cancellation policies at the same time. So play with that, make sure you have several of ones. And you have your own website as well, your own website to get bookings. Maybe this is where you can be creative in cancellation policies, as I said, right? Here again, you can say May, June, super flexible and more strict for July and August. If you know in your market you're going to sell out, because again, let's be clear, we talk about super low demand right now, but we know also some markets actually have a problem of supply, right? The US, I'm thinking about the Hamptons, parts of Florida, or parts of Tennessee, for example, or Lake Tahoe in California. Supply is actually going to be very tight. So there's no reason to discount, no reason to be super flexible for July and August, for example, I think. But before that, maybe so. So again, be creative on your website, but very transparent, right? Flo talked about this. Explain to the guests what's going to happen when things are easy to cancel or not to cancel, maybe depending on time of the year, so that at least nobody's surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and certainly if you're your rentals customer and using our software, then please talk to your account manager to find out the best strategy for you. They're more than willing to help you to get things set up in the right way. Okay, so let's say you start to see an increased demand. What's your strategy at that point?
I think that the thing we talked about, we took again the UK was actually the England Wales example is extreme, right? As we saw in the data actually with that Flo presented, the surge of bookings didn't happen in Scotland or Northern Ireland, because that's not what the Prime Minister of the UK talked about. He talked about England and Wales and Cornwall as well. So that's where you see the surge of bookings, right? So it does mean, again, if you know your Prime Minister or you know government's going to be talking about making a big announcement, and hopefully in the right way, don't be surprised, right? Usually it doesn't happen like this, right? The press leaks at least that this can be an announcement. So you really want to make sure that your website, your supply, your prices, cancellation policies, and your team are ready for that, right? Andrew shared this data, this wave of bookings that happen, right? You don't want your customer service to be understaffed. These are the 3 most important days, maybe of the year for you, right? To save your season. So you want to make sure everybody's there, that the prices are right, because again, you don't want your customer service to be overwhelmed by people saying, "Hey, is it the right price? It's not clear." Again, revisit thing. And a good tip is like, again, go to the website and book something yourself, right? Use your own website, because maybe there's something you thought about, but you consider policies, but maybe somebody in your team wrote it on the website. It's not kind of clear if you were a guest. So please make sure at least you're booking ahead as a guest on your website, to go through your booking flow once again, to make sure things are clear, because it's not during this big search that you'll be able to fix stuff. Second thing is to think about is that, again,
let's imagine, especially, let's imagine you are, if you're probably watching this, you're probably in the traditional vacation rental market. We talk about sea, mountain, rural areas, not cities, right? So let's imagine here, you're expecting strong demand. Again, why would you, I don't know, be too lenient on guests? What I mean here is that make sure you reward direct bookings. Make sure on your website, it's super clear that you're for the best conditions, not just in price, but actually in cancellation policies. We talk about risks, we talk about uncertainty. So just say, you know, we'll give you the best conditions here. And on the OTAs, again, if you think you'll be selling, you can be stricter there. Maybe you can have even a higher price. For example, if you imagine, you can, for example, say you offer a great cancellation policy, people can cancel, be more flexible, but you increase your prices on your OTAs for that, right? You price your option to cancel. Again, worst case, if you're in a strong area where things are going to sell out, maybe just in the end, going to relax the conditions at the same price. So if I'm being clear, make sure at least you reward direct bookings. And if you think going to sell out, it's okay, people can cancel anyway, and they will rebook in a strong area, right? Mm-hmm. Now in countries like Portugal, it's probably different. It's actually true that it's a fly-to market, as Andrew said. So here, on the other hand, you may actually want to have stricter cancellation policies, right? And say, if I get a booking, maybe I want to secure it. It's a bit tough to say that, but it's that may be the truth, right? You really may want to secure your bookings a bit more than in other areas where people may cancel in the future, but you can probably resell your room and even at the same price or even a higher price if there's scarcity in your market in July, for example.
All right, but thanks a lot for the insights, Thibault. It's a really complex issue. We have discussions with customers every day about cancellation policies, etc. So it's very hard to cover in such a short format. In terms of moving along, how do you actually read the demand in your market and see how you're doing and be on the lookout for these sort of demand spikes? Flo, would you like to just give an introduction to some of the tools that AirDNA is providing that can help do that?
Yeah, sure. So we AirDNA kind of was traditionally very strong with kind of looking at historical data and making sense of that and providing that back to property managers. And when COVID hit, it was kind of fairly clear that it's more important than ever to look into the future and be able to predict or identify kind of signs. And one of the tools that we provide is pacing. And so to kind of quickly explain what pacing means in the context of accommodations industry, pacing is the rate at which reservations are made for a particular date in the future. So a helpful metaphor here is a pace setter in a long distance running. They serve as a reference point for all runners to know how far ahead or behind they are of a particular goal. And in the same vein, pacing in the hospitality industry is a metric used to know how far ahead or behind bookings are currently pacing compared to previous years. Mm-hmm. So pacing is kind of a powerful forecasting tool that can be leveraged to gauge demand, revenue, and even expense-related staffing and maintenance. And in uncertain times as now, but not just now, it kind of allows you to get an understanding on how the market is moving. And in a nutshell, it helps you understand or answer questions like, how are hosts adjusting rates at the moment? When are they adjusting rates, and when, for what time frames? And how do rates compare to last year when coronavirus had not yet taken a hold on the market?
And then in terms of setting prices, shall we go on to look into the smart pricing?
Exactly, because the pacing kind of gives you it's like a speedometer when you're out on the road. It kind of gives you a feeling of how you're doing compared to the traffic. And if not, the main challenge of property managers is they always kind of refer to their own data. And it's kind of like driving without a speedometer, where you're not sure if you're kind of in the right pace. And to make things even a little bit easier, on the next slide, we've integrated kind of this information in our newly released smart rates, which kind of covers the market and analyzes the market on an ongoing basis. You're able to set your own comp set. So we will look at, if you've got a 2-bedroom in downtown New York, that we look at similar properties that are competing with you in the vicinity to see how they're performing, how they're priced, how is their occupancy, something that many property managers still do manually. And it's a very time consuming and not a very effective way to get information. And by automating this process, you get daily rate recommendations. And actually, if you go to the next slide, if I wanted to kind of hone in on the details here, where we see the base rate. This is something that we calculate from all the information that we get on your property and your competing properties in your market. And something fairly simple that property managers will know is that the day of the week is kind of relevant, where weekends are charged at a higher rate than a day of the week. Even if you sell in a typical tourism destination on a weekly basis, you would just accumulate these 7-day ranges. Seasonality, also we all know kind of our core seasons, but within seasons there are micro seasons which you might not be aware. And the thing that then makes it a bit more complex and where our logic kind of kicks in and helps you is high season doesn't really mean anything if no one's booking. The same way, the other way around, if it's low season but there's high demand due to change in booking behavior, we kind of provide this information back to you with the demand score and the lead time. Demand score being the demand of your region and your type of property for that day that you're looking at, and lead time is how far out are guests booking at the moment, which is something that we've seen change a lot. We talked about this earlier. We're very used to seeing people booking their summer holidays in January and February. Now we're in early April, mid-April, and people are still kind of holding their cards close to the chest, waiting to see where and when they can book. And this type of information can help you understand not just kind of why, what the rate is, but why the rate is just suggested as it is suggested.
Yeah, it's a very complex topic to go into. I'm sure you've got full webinars on how to use these functionalities as well.
Exactly. On that point, thanks so much for pointing this out. Feel free to reach out to AirDNA. We're very easy to find. And there's people available there to talk to you. If you want to dive into this a little bit more and get a demo, then just reach out to us.
Perfect. All right. In the interest of time, we're going to skip the next couple of slides because we'll provide this to you in the deck as a registrant afterwards. So we'll just finish up here for those that need to go right on time with 5 key takeaways. So things we think you should be thinking about: know how your feeder markets have changed. You can look back to last year, assume some of those changes are going to apply again this year, but be on the lookout for signals that might change it again. Things like the EU vaccine passport might make it a bit easier to cross borders. So that's the first tip. The second is know the things that might trigger demand spikes and monitor those. So for those feeder markets you believe are going to be the big ones this year, keep an eye on the press, keep an eye on announcements, talk to guests when they're actually calling you pre-booking or post-booking to find out, what's driving their decision making. The third point, understand and check the pacing. So, compare how you're doing this year to previous years, and also your place in the market as well. Are you outperforming the market, or are you underperforming, and adjust accordingly? Reflect on your 2020 demand. So where did those guests that did come in 2020 come from? And play on that theme of same places, same faces. I didn't mention it, but we are doing the exact same holiday this year, myself and my family, as we did last year, just because we know it works, and we feel a lot less uncertain about that. And finally, and probably most importantly, according to all of those different changes, adjust your rates and flexibility to match the demand certainty. So as demand is becoming more certain, you can tighten up your cancellation policies and booking rules, and play around with rates to see what the market will bear. So that's basically a summary. I'm sorry we ran out of time a little bit here. We do have a couple of questions. So for those who want to stay online, we can go for a few more minutes and just address those. For those who need to go, there'll be a copy of the deck emailed to you. And thank you a lot for joining the session today. So the first question is really, I guess, maybe something that Flo, you can kick off with, is how do you explain the France performance on 2021 bookings compared with Italy and Spain? We saw the chart where France was actually rebounding a lot faster than Italy and Spain. Why do you think that might be occurring?
Yeah, I mean, France is, as we said earlier, has a very strong local market. The assumption is that people will maybe drive through one country. They're maybe not too inclined to drive through 2 or 3 countries, because then they have to think about these other kind of destinations. France bordering with Germany, where Germans who might have been to the Black Forest and to Bavaria and to the North Coast are now venturing out to kind of go to visit their neighbors. Italy and Spain, really not a very strong local market. Pockets are not as deep. The economy wasn't as strong anyways, and with being highly dependent on tourism, the pockets are even lighter than last year. So, but then again, I really hope that Italian and Spanish and also kind of urban property managers take the advantage and offer really good deals to attract guests back to these destinations, because even though there will be a large portion of people who are fairly conservative with their travel plans, I feel there is another big batch of people who are keen, who are more adventurous. They want to travel. They are happy to take up any good deals and offerings. And I mean, knowing that urban centers are not as busy as they used to be, now might be actually the time to go visit Paris, to go visit Venice, to go visit Barcelona, because the streets are empty, the shops are open, and you get a very different feel of the city.
Yeah, and France is certainly a lot more of a traditional domestic tourism market as well. I think maybe. Yeah.
And adding to that as well is that in the winter there's a lot of mountain markets in France. Obviously, that there's less of in Spain and Italy. And it was the best snow ever. The ski lifts were closed, but the people came to the small mountains, for example, just to breathe the fresh air. And also at the time in February, there was not as many restrictions on traveling as in Italy, for example. So again, that's where restrictions are very important to keep an eye on, obviously.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, guys. The second question is from one of our US attendees from the United States. With managing properties in urban areas in the US, what sort of tactical strategies and ideas do you think she should be considering?
I think the first thing to do is to subscribe to our DNA. What I mean here is that I don't know which city you were in, but in some North American markets, for example, there's actually right now less supply than it was last year, right? Some people are just given up. People with mini Airbnb empires have just given up. It's just impossible for them. So I know where you are in your market, but there may be fewer short-term rentals. There's going to be a sort of renewed and more demand than last year. People are more vaccinated. People willing to travel to see family in France. Now, what's true as well is that the hotels will still be there in your cities, right? Compared with traditional vacation rental markets, you have still a lot of hotels, and hotels can discount way more than we can short-term, right? They can discount way more one hotel room than we can of a whole short-term rental, even in cities, right? So you still have to compete with hotels this summer that are ready to discount and get that booking, and also the hotels will really emphasize their super clean, hygienic, whatever practices. So you really want to make sure that this summer you're there. You say you're open like other people. You want to make sure that your price is competitive. Again, hotels will be there. And also emphasize your unique things compared with hotels, right? For example, the kitchen is there, kitchen is fully equipped, and that you are ready to give discounts on longer stays, for example, that you welcome remote workers, very important, you're laptop friendly. All these options now are in booking.com or Airbnb, for example. Make sure you tick the boxes to say you welcome longer stays or you're laptop friendly, for example. So very key, again, to stand out from the crowd and make sure you look like an updated listing.
Yeah. We also, one point that we didn't really touch on, I know we talked about yesterday when we went through the presentation, is kind of going through your database of existing clients, people who have booked with you in the past, back to the familiar, similar faces, similar places. It would be a good idea to kind of go through and be proactive, reach out to your guests that booked with you previously. If you have a newsletter, do your newsletter. Think about what your guests enjoy doing in the place where you have your property, and talk about what's open, what you can and cannot do, to kind of take away some of the heavy lifting in regards to research, because that's one of the things that me as a guest, I'm considering now. If I go to a place, can I do this? Can I go to the theater? Can I go to a museum? Can I go to these sites? Are the restaurants open? What are the restrictions? And maybe just help people out with a nice tailored newsletter to your existing database, and attract people with a nice offer and with some research on what's possible in your market.
Yeah, and just to add one comment to that, something I've seen done fairly successfully. I'm sure you've been looking into sort of midterm rentals, so extended stays, and back to the point, as it's easier to travel. People coming back to the city that you're operating within to visit friends and family, expats returning, there may be opportunities within those sort of segments to look at as well, but not maybe for the traditional very short stays, but something a bit longer. So look into your discounts for longer stays and things like that as well. Let's just move on. There are quite a few questions actually. Flo, there's a little fan club here for you with some very specific AirDNA ones. We will share Flo's contact details at the end, so perhaps you could reach out and get some of those answered directly. Yeah. But one that I think is quite interesting here is, if possible, to answer are prices increasing or decreasing for this summer compared to 19?
Okay, that's such a generic question that we would need to look at kind of at the market, what type of properties. Yeah. And I can't whip that up. I'm just an AirDNA employee. I don't have the brain of our database. But yeah, feel free to reach out to us or to me on LinkedIn or on airdna.co, and go to the chat, and then we can talk about kind of your region where you're based to kind of get that information. But yeah, the information is there. Yeah, and certainly, I mean, from our point of view at Your.Rentals, we see actually average booking size or value has grown actually to all-time highs for bookings made the last 3 months. A lot of those are summer bookings, a slightly longer length of stay, but it does seem that people do have some savings having stayed home last year, and this demand to travel. There's more analysis coming, so keep a look out on our blog to follow some of that, whether it's larger properties being stayed and other things that may.
And also you probably, as a property manager, you probably know your vacation rental market way more anyone. So what happened last year? What happened last summer? Was there shortage in supply again, right? So if there was shortage of supply, there's probably going to be the same case, I guess, this year, right? So there's probably no reason to discount too much, right? Because if we've seen prices increasing again, right? The Hamptons prices were amazing, especially if you have owners actually who are going to occupy their own place. The supply is going to lower again, right? So think about this, but you know your market. So if you know your market, use a tool like AirDNA, you could kind of understand what's going on with your data, what's going on in your market, and make a right decision.
Exactly. And there are some specific questions which we unfortunately don't have time to answer about specific locations. So please reach out to AirDNA and have a test of their MarketMinder software. Is it still called that? I think so.
MarketMinder, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Okay, but we're 10 minutes over. I really appreciate everybody who's joined us today. Very exciting to have so many people from around the world. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. A special thanks to our two special guests, Flo and Thibault. Hope we can do this again sometime.
Yep.
Thanks for having us. Enjoyed this. And yeah, I see there's so many questions. Please reach out to us directly, and I'm happy to follow up on your questions. But yeah, we went over quite a bit today.
Exactly. And you will get a copy of the slide deck here afterwards. So there are some email contact details there. Please feel free to reach out, and wishing everyone the best success this year. It's hopefully the year where everything really turns around for most of us, if not all of us. So have a great evening, and thanks for joining once again.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Andrew.
Tibor. Bye-bye.